did not drop the glass I was holding. I did not kick the door open. I did not make a sound. I stood in the hallway of my daughter's house, 3 hours after we buried her mother, and I listened through a crack in the kitchen door while she and her husband priced out the rest of my life like it was a foreclosure auction. And then I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I dried my eyes, fixed my face, and walked back into that living room full of casseroles and sympathy cards. And I let them believe I was exactly what they thought I was. A broken, fading old man. That performance took 11 weeks. By the end of it, my son-in-law was in handcuffs, my daughter was screaming his name in a courthouse hallway, and the two of them finally understood who they had been living next to for 15 years. My name is Silas Crane. I am 71 years old, and if you passed me on the street in Gloucester, Massachusetts, you would not look twice. I wear the same canvas jacket I have owned since the Clinton administration. I drive a 2009 Silverado with a rusted wheel well and a bench seat that smells like coffee and WD-40. I buy my groceries at Market Basket and I still clip coupons. Not because I have to, but because my mother raised me during years when a coupon was the difference between meat and no meat. Everybody in my life, including my own daughter, believes I am a retired refrigeration mechanic living on Social Security and a union pension. 46 years of crawling under compressors and rebuilding condensers in fish houses up and down the North Shore. That part is true. Here is the part nobody knows. In the early 90s, when the cod stocks collapsed and the ground fishing fleet started dying, the cold storage warehouses along the waterfront started dying with it. Banks would not touch them. Everybody saw rusting freezer panels and ammonia systems, one inspection away from condemnation. I saw buildings I knew how to fix with my own 2 hands, sitting on deep water frontage, selling for the price of a used car. I bought my first one at a tax auction for $11,000. I fixed the rack system myself, nights and weekends, and leased it to a seafood distributor out of New Bedford. Then I bought another. Then a trucking outfit with 6 reefer trailers and a desperate owner. I never told a soul except my wife, Margaret, and the lawyer who set up the paper. Today, the holding companies I control own 14 cold storage facilities from Portland, Maine down to Cape May, New Jersey. Refrigerated warehousing, blast freezing, reefer logistics. The portfolio appraised last year at a little north of $48 million. And my daughter thinks my biggest asset is a 2-acre lot on the harbor with an old house on it that smells like pipe smoke. Why did I hide it? Because I watched what easy money did to other men's children. I wanted my daughter to build a spine of her own, the way her mother and I had to. I thought I was teaching her character. Standing in that hallway with my wife not 8 hours in the ground, I learned what I had actually taught her. I taught her that her father was small. And small things are easy to step on. Before I tell you how I took their whole world apart, one frozen piece at a time, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight, because stories like mine happen in every town in this country. And if you have ever had family look straight through you like you are already gone, hit that like button and subscribe, because I promise you, you are going to want to be here when the wheelchair stops rolling. Let me back up to that afternoon. We buried Margaret on a grey Tuesday in March, the kind of raw New England day where the wind comes off the Atlantic with teeth in it. 41 years married. Pancreatic cancer took her in 7 months, and I held her hand through every one of them. The reception was at my daughter's house. A big brick colonial out in the suburbs west of Boston. The kind of house that is supposed to announce that you have arrived. I knew the mortgage on that house. Not because anyone told me, because I am an old man who reads county records the way other people read, box scores, and I had watched my son-in-law refinance it twice in 4 years. My daughter is 39. When she was 8 years old, I taught her to skate on Niles Pond, holding both her mittens while she screamed and laughed. She used to ride with me on service calls in the summer, sitting on an upturned bucket eating a fluffernutter while I bled refrigerant lines, and she would hand me wrenches and get the sizes wrong, and I did not care one bit. Somewhere between that little girl and the woman pouring wine at her mother's funeral reception, I lost her, and I am still not entirely sure of the moment it happened. But I can tell you the name of the reason. She married it. My son-in-law is 43, a wealth manager, or so the Christmas cards said. Square jaw, whitened teeth, a handshake he must have practiced in a mirror. The kind of man who calls you chief and checks his phone while you are talking. For 15 years, he had treated me with a very specific flavor of politeness, the kind you give a janitor. At the reception, he kept steering people away from me, speaking over my shoulder. Poor Silas. He's been slipping since Margaret got sick. We're keeping an eye on him. I had not been slipping. I had been grieving. There is a difference, but only one of them can be monetized. Around 4 o'clock, I went looking for a glass of water and some quiet. The kitchen door was pulled to, not latched, and I heard my daughter's voice through the gap, low and tight. I stopped with my hand on the wood. Old habit. 46 years in other people's basements and engine rooms teaches you to be quiet and listen before you walk in on anything. He cannot live in that house alone, she was saying. He left the burner on at Thanksgiving. He repeats himself. That's exactly what I'm telling you, my son-in-law said. That's the record we build on. Burner on, repeats himself. Mr. Bill, got lost driving. We write it all down, dates and times. Dr. Pell does the evaluation. He's a friend. He knows what these reports need to say. We file for emergency conservatorship in probate court, and we're appointed before the old man even understands what the hearing was for. I want you to hear that the way I heard it, the burner at Thanksgiving was a pot of cider I left warming on purpose while I helped Margaret to the bathroom because she could no longer walk unassisted. The missed bill never existed. They were not describing my decline. They were drafting it. And then what? My daughter said. And God help me, her voice was not horrified. It was tired. It was a woman going over a grocery list. Then we control everything. The pension, the social security, the house. That lot is 2 acres on the harbor with deep water frontage. Developers are paying stupid money for that footprint. I had a guy walk it in October. 1.8, maybe 2 million, and the house itself is a teardown. We place Dad somewhere affordable, somewhere on mass health eventually, and the equity solves our entire situation. Our entire situation. I learned the full size of that situation later, and I will get to it. But standing in that hallway, what froze the blood in my veins was not the money talk, it was the next sentence. From my own child, the girl from Niles Pond, 8 hours after we put her mother in the ground. He's going to fight it. You know how stubborn he is. Sweetheart, my son-in-law said, and I could hear the smile. Stubborn is a symptom now. Everything he does to defend himself just goes in the file. That's the beauty of it. The harder he fights, the sicker he looks. The logic was terrifyingly sound. That is what people do not understand about elder conservatorship fraud until they are inside it. It is a trap built out of your own behavior. Anger is agitation. Confusion at being ambushed is disorientation. Insisting you are fine is lack of insight. They had found the one courtroom in America where being innocent makes you look guilty. I did not push the door open. I want to be honest with you because this channel is about the truth. For about 10 seconds I wanted to. I am an old man, but I am an old man who spent 5 decades hauling compressors up ladders, and the animal part of me wanted to walk into that kitchen and put my son-in-law through the sliding glass door. Instead, I looked down at my hands and made them stop shaking, because a lifetime of negotiating leases and buying distressed buildings under the noses of Boston money, men had taught me one thing above everything else. The man who reveals his position first loses. They thought I was weak. Fine. Weak would be my weapon. I walked back to the living room, and I gave them their first piece of evidence. I stood by the cheese platter and asked my cousin's wife, loudly, whether Margaret was coming down soon. The room went silent the way a room does when an old man embarrasses everyone. My daughter crossed the floor and took my elbow with this gentle, performed tenderness. And over her shoulder I watched my son-in-law take out his phone and type a note. Date. Time. Symptom. Good boy, I thought. Write it all down. I'm going to feed you this rope, 1 foot at a time, and then I'm going to watch you hang yourself with it in front of a judge. That night I drove back to Gloucester, sat in Margaret's chair by the window, and called the only man on earth besides my wife who knew everything. Marshall Pike. We met in 1981 when he was a young lawyer doing closings above a bait shop, and I was a freezer mechanic with $11,000 and a crazy idea. He has papered every deal I ever made. He is 74 now, half retired, mean as a wolverine in a deposition, and he loved Margaret like a sister. I told him what I heard through the kitchen door. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the words that set the next 11 weeks in motion. Silas, they're going to come at you through probate, which means they're going to commit fraud on the court, in writing, under oath. Most men in your shoes would try to stop them. I could hear him lean back in that old chair of his. I think we should let them. So we let them. And here is where I need you to understand the rules of the game I chose to play. Because some of you are already yelling at your screens, asking why I did not just call the police that first night. With what? A conversation through a door, no recording, my word against theirs, weeks after my wife died. Exactly the kind of paranoid accusation that conservatorship petitions are made of. No. If I moved early, I looked sick. If I let them build their fraud to full size, every document they forged, every dollar they touched, every lie they swore to, became a separate felony with their names on it. I was not going to slap their hands. I was going to wait until both arms were all the way in the trap. First, I armored up, quietly. Marshall brought in a board-certified geriatric neuropsychologist named Dr. Naomi Achebe, and I will tell you who she is because it matters to me. 30 years ago, Margaret and I started quietly paying college costs for kids from fishing families that the sea had widowed. Margaret was a fisherman's daughter. It was her idea, her ministry, done through the church with no names attached. Naomi was the 4th kid we ever sponsored. Her father went down with the Seahawk off George Bank in 1991. She did not know her benefactor's name until Marshall called her that week. She cried on the phone. Then she got to work. Over 2 evenings in Marshall's conference room, she ran me through 6 hours of cognitive testing. Every instrument the courts recognize, all of it videotaped, dated, notarized. I scored in the 94th percentile for my age. We sealed it and sat on it. Second, I started recording. Legally, carefully, with Marshall checking every step, because Massachusetts is strict about these things and the last thing we needed was evidence we could not use. I documented everything in my own house. A camera on the porch. A camera in the kitchen. Sound where the law allowed. I carried a little medical alert pendant around my neck, the kind every worried adult child wants their father to wear. My daughter actually teared up when she saw it. Dad, I'm so glad you're taking this seriously. It took notes of a different kind. And third, I performed. Lord, did I perform. Through April and into May, I gave them a decline you could set a metronome by. I called my daughter and told her the same story about a man at the hardware store twice in one phone call, pausing in the same places. I let a water bill go red and made sure it sat on my kitchen table during her visits. I put my keys in the freezer while she watched, then patted my pockets for 10 minutes. One Sunday I called her by her mother's name and then looked horrified at myself, and she hugged me. And over her shoulder her husband typed on his phone, and I stared at the wall and kept my heartbeat slow the way you do when you are soldering a line 2 inches from your own face. You want to know the strangest part? Some afternoons, the performance was a mercy. I was a widower alone in a house full of Margaret's coats and Margaret's handwriting on the calendar. Pretending to be lost gave the real lostness somewhere to hide. While I acted, Marshall dug. And what he found in their finances explained everything except how they slept at night. My son-in-law had not had a job in 14 months. The wealth management firm had quietly let him go, and there was a regulatory complaint behind it. Money moved between client accounts to cover a margin problem. He left the house every morning at 7:40 in a pressed suit and spent his days in a coffee shop in Waltham. And at a country club he was 60 days delinquent on. The Colonial was mortgaged to the rafters and then remortgaged. Credit cards, 6 of them, a hair under 300,000 combined. And underneath all of it, the thing with teeth. A hard money loan, $90,000 at a rate that ought to be a crime, from an outfit out of Providence called Ironclad Capital Partners, secured against the house with a balloon payment coming due in June. Ironclad does not send polite letters. Ironclad sends men. My daughter knew. I want to believe she did not. I spent whole nights trying to build her an innocence, but the documents do not allow it. Her signature was on the refinance. Her name was on the cards that paid for Aruba and the leased Range Rover and the kitchen renovation with the Marble Island where, I am sure, the 2 of them stood when they first said the words conservatorship and Dad in the same sentence. The petition hit in the 2nd week of May. Emergency motion, Middlesex Probate and Family Court. Attached was Dr. Pell's evaluation, a masterpiece of fiction, diagnosing me with moderate stage dementia after a 40-minute visit my daughter arranged by telling me he was a grief counsellor through the church. Attached also was a durable power of attorney, dated the previous October with my signature on it, a signature I had never made. They could not even wait for the judge. They had forged me 5 months before my wife died, while I sat beside her hospital bed. The notary stamp on it belonged to a woman at a UPS store in Burlington who, when investigators finally put my photograph in front of her, said she had never seen me in her life. The man who signed as Silas Crane wore a Patriots cap and sunglasses and paid cash. They pulled the strict mall security footage. The Patriots cap got into a Range Rover. The emergency hearing took 9 minutes. I was not there. Marshall, by design, had not yet appeared, because we wanted them confident, and confident they were. Temporary conservatorship granted to my daughter, my son-in-law appointed agent under the forged POA. Within 6 days they had redirected my pension and Social Security to an account they controlled, listed my house with a commercial broker who specializes in development parcels, and moved me into a facility. Harborview Manor. Despite the name, you cannot see the harbor from any window in it. It is the cheapest licensed bed within 40 miles, a low brick building off Route 1 that smells like boiled vegetables and bleach over something worse. My daughter packed 1 suitcase for me and cried in the car real tears. And I will go to my grave believing those tears were real and despising her a little extra for it. Because a woman who can grieve you and rob you in the same hour has a room in her heart that should never have been built. My son-in-law carried my suitcase to the desk, shook the administrator's hand like he was closing on a condo, and said, in front of me, "He may say some wild things. Paranoia. It's part of the disease. He sometimes claims he's a wealthy man." He smiled at me, the first fully honest smile he had ever given me, the smile of a man who believes he has won. "Don't you, Chief?" I looked at the floor and mumbled. Inside I was pouring concrete. Now I will tell you about the nights, because this part is not strategy. This part is just true. They put me on a sedative I did not need and was not properly consented for, and the night aide on the B-wing, overworked, paid less than the man who fixes the ice machine, did not much care whether I tongued it or swallowed it. I tongued it. I lay in a vinyl bed, listening to a man down the hall call for a woman named Dot, until 2 in the morning every night, and I thought about Margaret. And I thought about my own mother. And I thought about how many people in this country are lying in beds like that one tonight, sharp as tacks behind their eyes, with nobody coming. If that is your father, go see him. Go this week. Stories like mine are rare. Beds like that one are not. There was one human being in that building with eyes that worked, a CNA named Ruthie, 50-some, raising her grandson, double shifts. The 3rd night she watched me palm the pill and pocket it, and instead of reporting me, she pulled my chart, frowned at it. Instead of reporting me, she pulled my chart, frowned at it, and said, "Real quiet. Mr. Burr, Crane, my mother had what they say you have. You don't have it." From then on, she dropped the pill in the cup and looked out the window. I will tell you what became of Ruthie before this story is over, because in my world, loyalty gets remembered in writing. The piece of evidence that turned a fraud case into something much darker came on my 19th night at Harborview, and I have Ruthie and that pendant around my neck to thank for my life. My daughter and her husband came for one of their documented visits, the ones that put loving family in the court file. Wheeled me to the visiting room, parked me by the window. I did my act, slack face, wandering answers, and then my son-in-law, believing I was past understanding, got a phone call and stepped just outside the doorway to take it, 6 feet from a vegetable in a wheelchair, and a recording pendant his own wife had praised. It was ironclad. The June balloon was coming and the house sale had stalled because Marshall, through 3 layers of shell entities, had quietly tied my property up in title challenges they could not see the source of. My son-in-law's voice climbed half an octave. "I understand the date. I'm telling you there's a faster path. The old man has a $2 million life policy term written years ago. The wife and kids split it as beneficiaries. He's in a facility now. He's heavily medicated. He's 80 pounds, soaking wet." A pause, and then the sentence I will hear in my skull until they bury me next to Margaret. "People his age aspirate in their sleep every night of the week. Nobody autopsies a dementia patient, you understand me. Nobody. Talk to your guy about what that's worth as a guarantee." Through the window glass, I watched my daughter in the parking lot below, sitting in the Range Rover, scrolling her phone. I do not know to this day exactly how much of that plan she knew. The jury later decided she knew enough. What I knew in that moment was that the game clock had run out. Patience is a weapon until the other man reaches for a gun. He had just reached. I pressed the button on the pendant twice, our signal, and by midnight Marshall had the audio, and by the next afternoon, so did the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, along with 11 weeks of everything else, the forged POA and the UPS store footage. Pell's evaluation set against Dr. Tur. Akabe's 6 videotaped hours of me scoring like a man 20 years younger. Bank records of my pension landing in their account and leaving the same week as a payment to Ironclad. The staged incident log my son-in-law had so helpfully kept on his phone, which prosecutors later subpoenaed, with notes that read less like a worried family and more like a screenplay, and the recording in which a man discusses, in a marble counter voice, the cash value of my last breath. The DA wanted to arrest him that Friday. Marshall asked for one accommodation, and the prosecutors, God bless them, had enough poetry in their souls to grant it. The permanent conservatorship hearing was already on the docket for the following Tuesday. My daughter and son-in-law would be there, under oath, swearing to my incapacity in open court, with their own attorney presenting Pell's report as fact. Let them, Marshall said. Let them get all the way up the ladder, then we take it away. Tuesday morning, Middlesex Probate Court. They wheeled me in themselves. Picture it. Because the cameras in that courtroom did not exist, and I want you to see it the way I lived it. Me in the chair in a cardigan Margaret bought me, hands folded, gazing at the middle distance. My daughter in a navy dress, dabbing her eyes. My son-in-law in his closing day suit, resting a proprietary hand on my shoulder for the benefit of the bench. Their lawyer talked for 20 minutes about tragic decline and a family's loving burden. Dr. Corder, Pell took the stand and perjured himself with tremendous fluency. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who had clearly read something in the file overnight that interested her, asked whether the respondent wished to be heard, expecting nothing because the respondent was to be heard, expecting nothing because the respondent was a husk in a wheelchair. The courtroom doors opened and Marshall Pike came down the aisle like weather, 74 years old, briefcase older than the bailiff. 2 associates behind him pushing a cart of bankers' boxes. Your Honor, Marshall Pike, appearing for Silas Crane, and my client would indeed like to be heard. I put my hands on the armrests, and I stood up. I wish I had the words for the sound my daughter made. It was not a scream. It was smaller, and worse, the sound of a person watching arithmetic fail. My son-in-law's hand came off my shoulder like the cardigan had caught fire. I buttoned my jacket, the way I had buttoned it before 100 negotiations these people never knew happened. And I said, in a voice that carried to the back wall, "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Silas Crane. I am 71 years old. I am of entirely sound mind, and for the past 11 weeks I have been documenting a criminal conspiracy by the petitioners to defraud this court, steal my estate, and, as of 19 days ago, to end my life for an insurance payment. My attorney has the evidence in those boxes, and officers from the district attorney's office are in the hallway. I apologize to the court for my performance. It was necessary. I learned from watching the petitioners that a performance, properly staged, can be very convincing. What happened over the next 2 hours I would not trade for any building I own." The audio played in open court. My son-in-law's voice, that marble counter calm, pricing my last breath, filled a silent courtroom while he sat there turning the color of suet. The UPS store footage, Achibi's tapes, the notary flicked weeks earlier on the witness list, Pell, asking for a lawyer mid-sentence. And then, because the Ulibus occasionally signs its work, the moment the money came up, their attorney, flailing, suggested that I, a confused pensioner, was being manipulated by my own counsel for fees, that I had no estate worth this circus. Marshall, who has waited 40 years to do this in a courtroom, slid one exhibit across the table. The holding structure. 14 facilities. The appraisal north of $48 million. I watched my son-in-law read that page. I watched him understand that the shabby old man whose harbour lot he had been licking his lips over had been, the entire time, one of the largest cold storage owners on the eastern seaboard, that every Christmas he had condescended to me about markets I could have bought his employer. The man actually laughed. One short, broken bark, the laugh of a gambler turning over the river card. But I was not finished, and this next part is for everyone in the comments of my last story who said the villains always seem to lose only what they try to steal. No. They lose what they have. There is one more item, Marshall told the court, relevant to the petitioner's financial motive. 3 weeks earlier, through a subsidiary, I had purchased a portfolio of distressed notes from Ironclad Capital Partners of Providence, who were delighted to sell, paper being safer than whatever they were contemplating. Among those notes, a $90,000 hard money loan, ballooning in June, secured by a brick colonial in the suburbs west of Boston. My son-in-law no longer owed Ironclad. He owed me, and I, as the court would shortly understand, am a far more patient creditor, and patience, in collections, is a terrible thing. The house with the marble island was foreclosed by autumn, and the harbour lot, the $2 million that started all this, in the hallway after the arrests, while officers read my son-in-law his rights, my daughter in handcuffs herself by then on the fraud and forgery counts, turned to me with mascara down her face and asked the only question she had left. "The house, Dad. It would have been mine someday anyway. Why didn't you just help us?" So I told her what Marshall and I had done years before, when her mother first got sick. The house and the land sit in an irrevocable trust. I hold a life estate, the right to live and die under that roof. The moment my heart stops, every shingle and every foot of frontage passes automatically. No probate, no will to contest, to the Gloucester Fishermen's Widows and Children's Fund, her mother's fund, the one she built in secret for the families of men the sea did not return. "You were never one signature away from $2 million, I told my daughter quietly, because some things should be said quietly. "You were one funeral away from being evicted, if your husband's plan had worked. If I had aspirated in my sleep, like people my age do every night of the week, the locks would have been changed before my wake. You were not killing me for an inheritance. There was no inheritance. You were killing me for nothing." I watched that land behind her eyes. It was the only moment in 11 weeks I felt something close to pity. Close. Not arrived. The trials took most of a year. My son-in-law was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, perjury, and elder financial exploitation. 22 years. My daughter took a plea on the fraud, forgery, and conspiracy counts and her cooperation. And I suspect the judge's read of who held the leash in that marriage brought her 12. At the sentencing, they put each other's names in their mouths like knives. He swore the insurance idea was hers. She screamed that he had forged the signature, that he had ruined her, that she had been trying to save her family. 15 years of marble countertops, and at the end they could not agree on whose hand was holding the pillow. The judge gave them both time to think it over. People ask me, and I see it in the comments on stories like mine, whether a father bears the blame. Whether 40 years of secrecy built the very greed that nearly killed me. Whether my silence raised that kitchen conversation. I have sat with that question at 4 in the morning, more nights than I will admit, and here is my honest answer. I taught that girl to skate. I paid for her education, walked her down the aisle, warned her, gently and then plainly, about the man she chose, and offered her a way out of his debts twice if she would only show me the books. She lied to my face both times. The money did not make her what she became. The money was just the X-ray. It showed me what was already in the bone. My silence was a mistake, maybe. Her hands on those forged papers were a choice. I will carry my mistake. She can carry her choice. They are not the same weight, and I am done pretending otherwise to make anybody comfortable. Last March, on the first anniversary of Margaret's death, I went to the cemetery with flowers expecting to stand there alone. There were 19 people at her grave. Naomi Achebe, who tests memories for a living and saved mine. Ufi, who is now the director of resident advocacy at a facility I had a hand in, buying and gutting down to the studs, the first decent wage of her life and worth every dime 10 times over. And kids, grown now, doctors and welders and a tugboat captain and a school principal, the children of drowned fishermen, the ones Margaret's quiet fund carried through. One of them, a young man who teaches high school in Lynn, shook my hand and said, "We figured it out, Mr. Crane, where it all came from all those years. We're your family too, if you'll have us." Standing in the same wind that took their fathers, I understood that I had not lost a child. I had simply learned, late and at terrible cost, that blood is a fact, not a virtue. Loyalty is a choice. Love is a choice, and the people who choose you are your family, whatever the paperwork says. I still drive the Silverado. I still wear the canvas jacket. But these days, when I walk the waterfront and look at those big white warehouses humming away at 20 below zero, keeping a whole coastline's catch honest, I let myself smile a little. People spent 40 years thinking the cold made me small. They never understood. The cold is where I do my best work. Everything I built in the freezer, where things keep, where nothing rots, where patience is not a weakness but a law of nature. My son-in-law wanted a frozen old man. He got one. Frozen solid all the way through and twice as hard as anything he ever met in his soft, borrowed life. So now I will ask you what I ask at the end of every story, and I want your honest answer, because I read every single comment, usually with my morning coffee looking out at the harbor. My daughter writes to me from prison. Twice now. The letters say she is sorry. They also, both times, mention the appeal and the lawyer she cannot afford. If you were me, would you answer her, because she is your blood and her mother would want it? Or would you let those letters sit in a drawer the way I have, because some doors, once they show you what is behind them, should stay shut? Tell me below. And if this story kept you company tonight, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories where this came from, and winter is long. I am Silas Crane. Stay warm. Stay sharp. And never, ever let them see the whole blueprint. Some mornings, I still stand at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold, and I think about how none of it happened by accident. Not one piece. My son-in-law did not wake up one Tuesday and decide to price out my life. He got there the way water gets to a foundation. One small crack at a time. A lie about a job. A loan to cover the lie. A bigger loan to cover the loan. Every dishonest choice made the next one easier, until a man standing 6 feet from a wheelchair could discuss my last breath in the same voice he used to order lunch. That is how cause and effect really works. It is not lightning. It is interest compounding quietly until one day the bill comes due. He planted 15 years of rot and he harvested 22 years in a cell. The math was never going to come out any other way. And I have to be honest about my own major too. I hid who I was from my daughter because I thought secrecy would build her character. It did not. Character is not something you can starve into a person. It has to be taught, shown, lived out loud, day after day. My silence was my mistake, and I paid for it. Her hands on those forged papers were her choice, and she is paying for that. Both debts got collected. That is the part nobody likes to hear, that life keeps the books, whether we look at them or not. What saved me in the end was nothing fancy. It was 3 old things my mother drilled into me before I was tall enough to reach a workbench. Be honest, even when it costs you. Because a clean conscience is the only asset nobody can forge. Be smart, which does not mean college. It means keep learning, keep reading, keep your eyes open when everyone assumes yours are closed. I beat 2 younger people with nothing but patience and a paper trail, because wisdom is just experience that refused to retire. And be tough, not loud tough, the quiet kind. The kind that lets a 71-year-old man lie in a vinyl bed in a place that smells like bleach, grieving his wife, and still get up the next morning and play his part one more day. Grit is not the absence of breaking. It is deciding what to do after you hear the crack. If you take one thing from my story, take this. You cannot control what people plant in their lives, even people you raised, even people you love. You can only control your own field, so tend it. Tell the truth in it. Think hard in it. And when winter comes, and it will come, stand in it without folding. Margaret used to say the sea does not reward the strongest man, it rewards the one still rowing. She was right about that, like she was right about most things. I am still rowing. I intend to be rowing for a good while yet.